All right, let's talk about a really fascinating film from 1985 called Plenty. It's based on this really powerful, pretty controversial play, and it's all about one woman's journey from this incredible high of wartime idealism all the way down to the crushing reality of post-war Britain. It's a heavy one, but man, is it a journey worth digging into.
And I mean, just look at this cast. Seriously, it's an absolute who's who of talent. You've got Meryl Streep, just completely at the top of her game. You've got legends like Sir John Gielgud and Sir Ian McKellen. And then you've got Sting and Tracy Ullman. This was not some quiet little indie movie, okay? This was a huge deal, a major cinematic event. But here's the thing. Even with all that star power, the reception was, well, it was all over the place. Some people were calling it an epic masterpiece. And then you had others who called it cold and clinical. You know, totally alienating. So what gives? What is this film really about, and why did it split audiences right down the middle? Okay, so to get to the heart of this movie, you really have to get to the heart of its main character, Susan Traherne. And Meryl Streep's own words right here, they're the key. Susan is, well, she's not your typical, easy-to-love hero, not at all. She's just filled with this massive anger, and she is absolutely fearless about expressing it. She challenges everything. You know, the whole production is kind of a reflection of this complexity. On one hand, you have this incredibly dense, political, almost academic stage play. But on the other hand, it's being brought to life by this star-studded A-list cast. So what does that mean? It means these really challenging, complex ideas were suddenly being beamed out to a massive global audience. So let's rewind. Let's go all the way back to the beginning of Susan's story. We're going to start at a moment in her life that was, well, it was her peak. A time when everything made sense, when life had this crystal clear purpose. So during World War II, Susan is working as a courier for the French resistance. Think about that. She's behind enemy lines in Nazi-occupied France. It is unbelievably dangerous work, but it's also thrilling. It's full of this incredible camaraderie and a moral purpose that is just black and white. You're fighting pure evil. She's fighting for something she truly believes in, and honestly, it's the most alive she will ever feel in her entire life. And this line right here, this is everything. This is the absolute peak of her hope, her idealism. The war is ending, she's looking out at a liberated France, and she truly believes the future is just going to be an endless series of days just like this one. That spirit, that hope, she thinks it's going to last forever. And that single moment of pure, undiluted hope, man, it's going to haunt her for the rest of her life. But, well, you know it's not going to last, right? That promise, that feeling, it starts to fade, and it fades fast. The next chapter of her life is defined by something else entirely. Not purpose, but an illusion. The illusion of plenty. Yeah, that title, Plenty, it is just dripping with irony. I mean, on the surface, that's what post-war Britain was supposed to be, right? An era of prosperity, of plenty for everyone. But the whole point of the play is to show you the rot just underneath all of that. The hypocrisy, the moral decay, this feeling of national decline, all of this spiritual emptiness that Susan feels so deeply. And this breaks it down perfectly. Look at this contrast. On one side, you have the promise, a life of purpose. On the other, the reality, just aimlessness. The promise was clear morality, good versus evil. The reality? The suffocating hypocrisy of the British establishment she finds herself in. She was promised a bright new world, and what she got was a nation in decline. It's a brutal bait and switch. And the story is really smart about this. It anchors Susan's personal breakdown in these huge historical moments. The Suez Crisis in 1956 is the big one. For Britain, this was a moment of absolute national humiliation. It was a clear sign that the empire was crumbling. And this public, political collapse, it's a perfect mirror for Susan's own private, personal collapse. The nation's disillusionment is her disillusionment. So what's the big idea here? What was the playwright even trying to do? Well, there's this concept called dialectical art, which sounds kind of academic, but the idea is simple. It's art that's not just about telling you a story. It's about forcing you to see what's really going on beneath the surface of everyday life. The hidden rules, the ideologies. And that's exactly what Plenty is designed to do. It's all about pulling back that curtain. And one of the main ways it yanks that curtain back is through its female characters. They basically become these rebels, pushing back against all the conservative rules of their time.
Yeah, Susan and our friend Alice, they're called progressive misfits, and that's the perfect way to put it. They're completely out of sync with 1950s Britain. They reject traditional marriage, they're open and free with their sexuality, they're basically living this hippie lifestyle decades before that was even a thing. They're like a glimpse of the future, and the stuffy patriarchal world around them has no idea what to do with them.
And this is the system they're up against. Just listen to this line from a senior diplomat. It's just devastatingly cynical. He's basically saying that for a man in the diplomatic service, having a mad wife isn't a problem. In fact, it's good for your career. It shows a world that is so dismissive of women, so patriarchal, that a woman's complete mental breakdown is just seen as a career move for her husband. It is an absolutely brilliant and infuriating piece of writing.
Okay, so you've got this really wordy, intellectual, idea-driven play. How do you turn that into a movie? Well, it wasn't easy, and this gets us back to why the critics were so divided.
One of the biggest complaints you hear about the film is its tone. A lot of critics, and audiences too, felt that the director's style was just too distant, that it made everything feel cold and clinical, and that they just couldn't connect emotionally with what was happening.
But here's the other side of that coin, and it's so important. What if the coldness isn't a bug, but a feature? What if that's the whole point? Think about it. Susan is a character who's completely alienated, completely disillusioned. To play her with a lot of warmth would just betray the entire story. That emotional distance you're feeling, that's the message.
And Meryl Streep herself was right there with that idea. She said the reason she took the role was because Susan is, in her words, unpalatable and tough to take. She found it fascinating because you just didn't see female characters like that, characters who were so demanding, who refused to just be nice and quiet. She wanted to dive right into that difficulty.
All right, so let's bring this all home. This is where we see how one woman's personal decline becomes the story of a nation's decline. Because in the end, this isn't just about Susan Traherne. Her slow, painful mental breakdown, it's a metaphor, a really powerful one. It's a metaphor for the decline and disillusionment to Britain itself after the war. As she loses her mind and her hope, the country she fought for is losing its own sense of purpose, its own place in the world.
And it all leads to this absolutely gut punch of a line from her husband who has put up with so much. It's just a brutal, devastating summary of her life. For someone who started with so much hope, this is the tragic end. It's like the entire conventional world is speaking through him, delivering its final, crushing verdict on her entire existence.
So that leaves us with one last question, doesn't it? A story about what happens when idealism collapses, about the painful gap between what you're promised and what you get, about the anger of someone watching their country decline. Does that sound familiar? Maybe a story like Plenty isn't just a period piece about post-war Britain. Maybe it's more timely now than it's ever been.